Hey everybody, we're going to do another update, and this is going to be a two-part series thing. So we're going to talk about generally the regular schedule, and then I want to spend some additional time talking about the bill that we did regarding border security and continued appropriations. So this is somewhat of a non-standard week here because of a couple things, namely two funerals for former and current members of Congress. As you know, John Dingell from Michigan passed on, the longest-serving member of Congress. And unfortunately, Walter Jones from North Carolina, a currently serving member, passed on. And so typically, just so you know, there'll be members will go to the district to pay their respects in the district. So that was two trips out of Washington, D.C. in the same week. So it kind of obviously impacts the schedule there. But we send our condolences, our thoughts, our prayers are with both families. I knew Walter well, and it is a great loss to our country, in my opinion, in that regard. But to both of those fine gentlemen, Godspeed, and our thoughts and prayers are with their families. From a hearing standpoint, we met with the President of Colombia, and as a person of Colombian descent, that was kind of an added bonus for me. But he pledged he's the new president of Colombia, and he's pledged his support and cooperation and closeness with America, which is great, especially with what's happening in Venezuela, right on their border. And as you might have seen, he met with the president and talked about some of the same things. So we met with him. We also had a hearing in the Foreign Affairs Committee on the future of Venezuela. It was somewhat contentious. You might have seen some of that with the special envoy, Elliot Abrams, from previous administrations. People have very strong opinions about him. I do think he's a competent individual. And we talked about the socialist dictatorship in Venezuela, the impacts on the region, what America can be doing, what we can expect. And as you may or may not know, there was a duly elected president elected in Venezuela, but he's not allowed to ascend to power because the dictator won't let him. And we support the democratic duly elected president as Americans and as America as a position of policy along with a lot of other countries. But we had a hearing on that. We also had one in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the Aviation Subcommittee, on the impacts of the shutdown. And because of the funding impasse, aviation was particularly hard hit because of their nexus with Homeland Security and, of course, with transportation funding, which was also included in the partial government shutdown. On the legislative agenda, of course, like I said, it was somewhat light, but the biggest issue that we did was pass a resolution on Yemen. And this resolution that passed was regarding continued American support to forces opposing Iran in Yemen. Now, I voted against this resolution because they said we should not be supporting Saudi Arabia in their war against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And of course, this is a proxy war. This is the Houthi rebels are being supported by Iran, and the Yemenese government is being supported by Saudi Arabia. What America does is what we do in over 100 other countries by agreement, not by treaty, but by agreement, is support their efforts. And so while America doesn't have boots on the ground in Yemen, we're supporting the targeting that the Saudi Arabia does for their munitions. That's its intelligence and targeting. And this resolution sought to stop that. And so, number one, the bad precedent would be is that we do it with over 100 other countries. We do similar things, and this would be a precedent that says we can't be doing that under the War Powers Act. This doesn't have anything to do with the War Powers Act, in my opinion. And it would imperil all those other agreements, number one. Number two, while Saudi Arabia is obviously a very imperfect actor, and you know that that I am not the biggest fan, let's put it that way, of Saudi Arabia. I was one of the few people that called for the declassification of the 9/11 report components that dealt with Saudi Arabia. We have a choice here to pick between our tepid ally in Saudi Arabia or Iran, who's an enemy of the United States. And I thought it important to stand with our ally as much as possible and not set the precedent for bad policy otherwise regarding our agreements with these other countries. So we also had a motion to recommit on anti-Semitism, and I was very happy to stand with 424 other members of Congress who agreed with the same thing. There is a movement across the United States and generally across the world of anti-Semitism that's resurgent, and I find it very problematic and disappointing and disconcerting. Particularly the BDS movement, and BDS stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. And this is happening on college campuses and generally around America and around the world where we oppose Israel and the Jewish state. And so we took a vote to say that those things can no longer stand. There were several members of Congress that have made anti-Semitic statements, and we wanted to highlight that as something that we don't stand for as a country. That passed with overwhelming support. So generally, that was the news from Washington, D.C. There are just two other items I think of important note. One is that a book came out by the former director of the FBI, or Mr. McCabe, regarding his admission that Mr. Rosenstein had sought to wear a wire and tape record the president, so to speak, and use that to invoke the 25th Amendment. And I find that very, very troubling. Just to let you know, the 25th Amendment was passed by Congress and signed into law by a president because in the past a president had become incapacitated. He had a stroke. And it is for that purpose. That's what the 25th Amendment is for, so we don't have someone who's serving in the presidency who is incapacitated. It is not to be used because you have a political difference with any president to remove them from office administratively. This is the duly elected president, whether Democrat, Republican, whether they like him or not. We've got to follow the Constitution. And having the top law enforcement officials discussing how to do that, I find that very, very troubling. So that's number one. Number two, I just found it topical in the news that Amazon announced that they were going to pull out of their agreement to relocate their second headquarters in New York City because of the socialist policies by some of the representatives there and the fact that they didn't want Amazon to come. I just think that's an interesting thing to discuss maybe around the kitchen table or around the dinner table about where we're heading as a country and what the effects of socialism are. So that's the update for the week. I'm going to do a second update, though, on the legislation that we just passed in the House regarding border security and the continued appropriation. So thanks a lot. I'll see you soon. Hey, folks, I want to talk to you about this bill that just passed and was signed into law regarding the continued funding, the continued appropriations, and Homeland Security in particular. As you know, I voted against it. I spoke on the floor against it. I think it's really, really bad policy, number one. And while I understand that we want to keep the government open, and I agree with that, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We should be able to do two things at the same time. So we should be able to get good border security and fund the government. This funded the government and actually made the problem, in my opinion, of border security worse. And I'm going to quantify that for you. So among other things in the bill, one of the things that really, really I find problematic is Section 224, which bars ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, from removing illegal people here illegally if they are the sponsor, potential sponsor, or part of the household of a sponsor of an unaccompanied alien child based on information shared by HHS. And I'll tell you why that's so important, because one of these unaccompanied minors comes across the border, Border Security turns them over to Health and Human Services, and that's where the interviews happen. How did you get here? Who brought you? Who are you with? And so on and so forth. Once this child is placed in a home, anybody in that home, remember it said household, anybody in the household, it bars them from any of the information shared by HHS. So if ICE goes in and says, this child is being trafficked by these people around here, they can use none of that information that came from HHS, including the information that the child said, this person is selling me into slavery. None of that information can be used. What this essentially does is give amnesty to all those people associated with that child in that household. And just to let you know, 80% of people that are involved with the unaccompanied minor right now are here illegally. 80%, over 80%. So that is a terrible precedent to set. It puts our taxpayers in part complicit with helping people bring these children and people into our country for human trafficking. I just find it so unacceptable. The other thing it does is, as you know, we wanted to deal with some of the barriers on the unprotected portions of the border. Those are the portions in between the points of entry, so the vast expanses. and particularly in the Rio Grande sector. So that's where a lot of the drugs, human smuggling, gang activity is coming across the border. So that's where this is really focused. In that sector, per the law, Section 231 bars barriers in the Santa Ana Wildlife Refuge, the Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park, the La Lomita Historical Park, and the National Butterfly Center, or the Vista Del Mar Ranch Tract of the Lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge. So we said we're going to build some barrier to people that are coming across the border, except in these places, which, oh, by the way, are all along the border. So we're saying we're going to do it, but we're not going to do it because we can't, because we just limited it. Also, Section 232 allows cities to veto barriers within their city limits. Just think about that. So the federal government is saying we're going to protect the border, except in these cities that the cities have the purview to say no. Where else in the Constitution, immigration is the purview of the federal government? It's not the purview of the state or the local municipality. If it were, as you recall, the governor of Arizona a couple years back, when the federal government wouldn't act and her state was being overrun by crime, drugs, and illegal immigrants, tried to act on her own, and the court said, no, you cannot act as a state. It is the purview of the federal government. Now in this law, we're saying that it's not the purview of the federal government, it's literally the purview of the town. And I'm going to name some towns for you that are right on the border. Roma, Texas, the Rio Grande City in Texas, Escobares, Texas, La Grula, Texas, and the census-designated place of Saliano, Texas. Which are all, by the way, sanctuary locations. So we're going to give them the option to choose whether they want to place a barrier. It's not just a barrier for their location, it's a barrier for the rest of the country where people are coming across. So I found that to be very problematic. It actually lowers the bed space for ICE detainees. So understand, we're about 50,000 right now. So we catch a criminal who, by the way, it's not the crime of crossing the border that we're catching this criminal. These are for additional crimes. And we have to have a place to house them. Right now, we have about 50,000. The number is about 50,000. We actually reduced that to 45,000. So now what we're going to have to do when we catch people that have committed crimes other than crossing the border, pick any crime that you want to, whether it's drunk driving or driving while impaired or murder or robbery or anything else, we have to literally let them go because we don't have any place. The law says we don't have any space for them. The ICE is going to have to choose between this criminal or that criminal, but some criminal is going to be let out into our community. We actually reduced ICE appropriation by $700 million. So we're going to have less enforcement on the border. And then finally, maybe people don't find this important, but I always do. We actually are spending more money than the president or the agency asked for. And, I probably don't need to tell you that we just went officially over $22 trillion in debt. But the other things that were included in this bill, the EPA, 30% more than requested. The Department of Interior, 23% more than requested. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, 19% more than requested. The Department of Commerce, almost 17% more than requested. We don't have any more money, folks, and because this was a must-pass bill, we're actually spending more money than was actually asked by these agencies to do their job, and I just find that unacceptable. So those are my thoughts for the moment. People say, well, why did the president sign this then? We had a shutdown, as you know. The president was requesting more border security. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer said they would not negotiate in good faith until we reopened the government. The president took them at their word, reopened the government, and this is what they offered him. And I think he wanted to be the bigger person than the statesman and say that okay, we're going to reopen the government. I don't agree with any of this, but we don't want another shutdown. And as you know, because of his discord, he declared a national emergency because he knows, as you can clearly see, that this isn't solving the problem. And the answer that government should, the question that government should answer is, how do you solve the problem? We actually just made the problem worse. Obviously, the president recognized that, and then he declared the emergency. by constitutional provision and by law, he is afforded the ability to do that. Many presidents, since the law has been in place, have done that, so this is completely within the president's purview. And I wish that we weren't doing it, because I think we should be doing it as a legislative body. Congress should be trying to secure our country and make sure our community is safe. But we failed our president, and so as a last option, this is what he's doing, and I support it. I support securing our country, and this bill that we just passed, it doesn't do it, so the president is doing it, and I support doing it any way we can. So anyhow, that's the update for now. Appreciate your thoughts and your consideration and your continued viewing. God bless you. Have a great day.